Jubaili. Welcome to this conversation. Welcome to Tarawat. It's a pleasure to have you with us today. I'm particularly interested in understanding a little bit more about how your family business has managed very successfully to maintain a very motivated workforce and, talk a little bit about the human resources aspect of what we have been going through over the past couple of months. To start off, perhaps you could give us a bit more background about yourself and about your family business.
Sure. Well, good morning, and thank you for having me, giving me this opportunity to talk about our experience. I read an article recently saying that this was a period where, it gave HR a time to shine. Before maybe it's always CEOs and CFOs usually that are at the headlight, but right now it's really the head of HR that have been driving the organization through this crisis. And I thought that was an important perspective. Jubaili Bros is a family business. We've been in business for over 40 years, and we're in over 10 countries, around 1,300 employees, and our major hubs are Lebanon, UAE, and Nigeria. We function more as a decentralized model, and so definitely I'm heading HR here for the UAE with a high level of coordination with the other hubs.
Very interesting. And so how did you join the family business? Have you always been active in it, or how did that process happen?
No, actually, I was really into social development. And so for 5 years, my first 5 years after university, I worked with nonprofit organizations in different parts of the world. And then, I came back to the UAE and I said, okay, let me test it out. And it was a right fit from day one. And so I've been in the business for 5 years now.
For 5 years. Excellent. Let's rewind a couple of weeks. So, I mean, it's quite extreme to think that a couple of weeks make such a big difference, but I think in 2020 they do. So let's go back to, let's say, mid-March when, the whole COVID-19 pandemic starts taking a hold of our region, of the world, but also of our region. As a family business, what were some of the first challenges you had to address with regards to safeguarding your teams?
Well, the first question was, how do we keep employees safe? If you remember these early days, there was information coming from everywhere. I mean, the phone was blowing up with videos and messages and all these things scaring people. And there was really no way to find out what was accurate and what wasn't. I remember early on, is it airborne? Do we really need to wear masks, or should we keep the masks for the doctors? And then, we said, okay, let's buy thermometers. And then at that time, the market was empty. You couldn't find it. We were said, we need to buy the disinfectant spray. But then we couldn't find what machine we needed, or we didn't know what formula was safe to use. So not having that accurate information was a very big challenge at the time. I mean, I would even say up till today, it still is, but on those early days, it was a big challenge. The second one was getting our teams ready to work from home. I mean, for us, it was around March 11 that we had our first crisis management meetings, and then they happened daily from there. And, we had maybe, I would say, 1 to 2 weeks to get our teams fully ready to work from home. Part of the business, part of it is a factory. So obviously those couldn't, but all the ones that could, about 70 employees, we had to get them ready to work from home, which means, we needed the tools. Everyone at that time was buying out laptops in the market. I remember getting them connected and making sure there were some guidelines of, okay, how do we do this? Most of us have never done that before. So that was the other challenge. And finally, it was the fear. I mean, even in the early stages, because of all the media, people were scared to come to work. And I remember near the end of March, we had our first employee test positive. So it was in a factory, and the adjacent factory that was not even connected, we closed it down because employees were saying, what happens to us? What happens to our families? So we really had to be empathetic at this time, that everyone was really scared, and we had to sort of stop the factory work and really make sure that, our employees felt safe and comfortable. So fear amongst employees was a big challenge.
Of course, I'm sure you mentioned it a little bit, but what I'd be very interested in to know is, Did you put any specific procedures in place to navigate this and to ensure also that your staff not just felt safe, but also continue to be productive?
Yes. So communication. One thing that we did is we made sure that every single employee had access onto a communication channel by the company. We used WhatsApp. We made sure that the lines of communication were clear. If there was critical information needed to reach the top, how would that happen? And we were strategic about our messages. We wanted to inform employees any updates that were accurate information on how to protect themselves or on government regulations. And so, or what was happening with the company, were we open, were we closed, what was happening. If someone was infected, we had to find a way to let them know without causing this fear. And so that was strategic communication, was a way that we were able to navigate through this period, and then identifying sources of risk and mitigating the risks that we could. So, transportation. The majority of our employees were coming to and from work using public transportation, and
Right.
obviously that, it was a scary time that you could get infected through that. And so we immediately said, everyone coming to work, we will arrange transportation for you. And we did the private buses, at 50% capacity. The other was the social distancing. So I mentioned we have factories, and obviously sometimes it wasn't possible to maintain that distance. And so we ended up going to shifts. So we have 2-day shifts to ensure that there was enough social distance. And then
Right.
finally, the living situation. I know around the Gulf, this was a huge issue, is
Mhm.
the room sharing, the labor camps. And so we said, okay, we know that this is a source of risk. But that one was one we couldn't mitigate, whether it was because employees actually didn't want to leave their living accommodation because they were with friends or family, or because we couldn't find a facility. And I know a lot of companies were looking for that. So we mitigated the risks that we could, and the ones that we didn't, we just had to live with.
Mhm. That's very interesting. I mean, through all of this, one of the biggest challenges that we've seen, of course, is, across family businesses in our network, is this challenge of making sure that everybody is safe, secure, operational. But then, of course, because of those constraints or because of that sudden shift, the motivation that people feel, to work and to be productive is obviously challenged. So, was there a time that you addressed that, or how would you go about making sure that once that big shift happened, that you could go back to actually performing properly?
I think this is where family business had an upper hand because there is the feel that we are a family, we are a community. And so every single one of us, we had to lean in on that. And if
Yeah.
you were a supervisor and you were asking your team to come to work, you had to take on that emotional responsibility and sort of, say it's fine and we're working through this. And
Right.
everyone had those fears, whether it was the people working from home or the people coming to the factory, managers and team leaders across had to take on that emotional responsibility and say, we're in it together and we're here.
You operate across three very different geographies, right? You have Lebanon, you have the UAE, and you have Nigeria. I'd love to hear from you how your company and your family business has experienced this phase differently in all these three geographies. It must have been a huge difference, I would imagine.
Yeah, I mean, it was really interesting to see what was happening. I mean, in Lebanon, the financial crisis, started sometime around October. There was the Thawra, and things were just getting worse with COVID and extreme devaluation of the currency. So, uh, challenges with payments. So they were going through a crisis, a huge crisis, just for Lebanon's history. And then there was COVID, so there was a double impact. Nigeria, maybe it's had a similar crisis before with the oil price. They're very oil dependent, and at that time, you can remember the oil price crashed, and so they also had devaluation, and they had to say, okay, we've been through this before, and we know what we're going to expect, and they had to start taking actions. So each country really had to look inward and make decisions based on what the next 9 months would bring. Uh, what was important was obviously we had the crisis board meetings where we were discussing these
Hmm.
issues, and it was clear to us that we couldn't create any policy that was overlying for the company, but we did say, we have a guiding principle. We need to safeguard our employees during this time. It is not the time where we say, let's let them go, let's make any rash decision. So we had a guiding principle, and each country management took that principle and made the decisions based on that.
Excellent. And so you must have, I mean, you've gone through, like everybody, quite a turmoil over the past couple of weeks. What are some of the learning points that you could kind of summarize your experience as far as you can see now? Obviously, there's still more to come, but as we are speaking now, a couple of months in, what were some of the learning points that you would be able to share?
So one of them is the importance of decision making, and in that, I say let your values drive your decisions and not fear and the unknown as much as possible. And having decentralized decision making, because each market will be different to a certain extent, that's going to help. And being proactive in decision making. There is always an unknown. And so figuring that out and then making a decision, we found that to be very helpful. The second one I've mentioned, it's a common theme, is the communication. It is, I believe, it's an underrated element of the organization, especially in a time of crisis. So really leverage communication and use it as a tool as much as possible. And the last one is a strong management team. And so the first two elements couldn't take place if you didn't have a strong management team. And that is the leadership in the team. And again, someone who can call the shots, is confident in their decisions, and a strong team to implement. So, we were having our crisis management meetings every day, and there were so many actions we needed to take. We needed people competent to implement those. So those for me were the top three, guiding principles that got us through this crisis.